Welcome to our webinar, The Path to Impact. Foundation Leaders Share Their Journeys. Hello, I'm Elizabeth Wong, National Director of Philanthropic Advisory Services at Foundation Source, the nation's largest provider of comprehensive support services for private foundations. We offer unparalleled knowledge and expertise to our clients through administrative support, active compliance monitoring, tax and legal expertise, online foundation management tools, and philanthropic advisory services. I am joined today by my colleague, Robin Houlihan, Senior Philanthropic Director at Foundation Source. Together, we are delighted to welcome all of our listeners to this session and to be speaking with the leadership of two family foundations. Our guests are Lori Cushman, President and member of the Board of Directors of the Justamere Foundation, and Stephen Harris, Executive Director and member of the Board of Directors of the Åcahand Foundation. Our discussion today will focus on these two foundations' distinct approaches in establishing their activities and demonstrating some of the many ways there are to approach grant making and achieve impact through giving. Welcome, Lori and Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
So we're excited to talk with Lori and Steve, but first we want to start with this view of their work. The constant in Justamere's work is its commitment to supporting the community of Chester County, Pennsylvania. Their goal is to improve the lives and the livelihoods of the residents of this community. Åcahand, you will see, is consistently focused on creating opportunities for the communities it supports, and it has done this in multiple geographies. So let's hear how they both approach this work. Lori and Steve, let's start our discussion with a focus on your foundation's early development. Some foundations start with knowing their area of focus and have a vision of what success looks like, while others develop their grant-making focus and goals more organically. So I'll start with a few questions for you. How did the founders arrive at this point, the beginning of the foundation? What about their business success? What skill sets or mindsets do they bring to this work? How were they charitable before? And what drove the change to a private foundation? So Lori, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. We were started by a family that did very well in the tech industry here locally in Chester County, and they have already been very generous with their giving in different areas. As they decided to expand into certain areas that were a little more complex, they decided that it was time to perhaps have some dedicated attention to it. So that's when they decided to put the Justamere Foundation together.
Great. Steve, could you tell us a bit about your founder's experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, our founder grew up in a small rural community and with limited opportunities, but he was able to create a successful technology-based transportation logistics business from that. And following his master's degree and working for the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C., doing computer-related development and market research, he returned to his hometown roots. And from there, he, in the mid-90s, started his business. And it was one of those typical sort of dot-com era businesses where, the spark for his business idea came from seeing a billboard on his way back from California following an unsuccessful sort of contract negotiation with his then job. And from there, he hatched this business, and typical of the dot-com era, started this in his basement, which of all things. And from there, he sort of grew his business, added additional products and services to the business. And then the founders had additional entrepreneurial ventures that were successful as well. And so, really that led to thinking about how could they provide more substantial giving along with their family members. Part of that was, being in a small community, they were actively involved in connecting people and serving their community. They were, he served as the mayor of his local community and was sort of instrumental with some early education initiatives to bring dual credit or college credit to high school students that were still in high school, and they also did a lot of unique things in the community. They were avid gardeners, and so they would grow large cantaloupes or watermelon and kind of distribute those in the community. And so they were really actively involved from kind of education perspective as well as community involvement. And from that really, that growing their community led to wanting to grow their philanthropy.
Thank you, Lori and Steve. Let's take a quick look at some of the takeaways from the experiences of these two founders. There are some common themes. They both led extremely successful businesses and then applied their business acumen to their charitable giving. And I am struck by the presence of a basement in which companies might be started.
Yeah.
Each of our founders were charitable throughout their lives and really inclined to give back to their communities. And finally, they made the choice to evolve their giving from charity to organized philanthropy. So now we want to turn our attention to the first steps that each foundation took in their initial days. So let's talk about the starting point, the desire to help. Can you tell us about the initial ideas that led to the foundation's first set of activities or grants, even in the face of being new to grant making? And what was the nugget that you started with? What were the problems that you wanted to solve? And Steve, how about we get started with you?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. The founders had a great experience raising their family and developing their successful business in rural Idaho, and they wanted to really give back to the community that had given them their start. And so they wanted to give back to this area, New Plymouth, Idaho, which has a population of approximately 1,700 people. And education had been, as they had their children in schools throughout the growing up years, they really, were integrated into kind of helping the schools. And so we knew this was kind of the place where they wanted to begin their philanthropy. And as they kind of evaluated the school district, there were a couple of different problems. One was kind of the quality of education, but also retaining qualified teachers in the community, kind of in a rural community. And so one of the first ideas, I guess, that we had was to help from an educational standpoint and improve learning across all the different grade levels. And so we worked with you, Elizabeth, to come up with goals and objectives for a grant to the school district, and that would impact both kind of the students and the teachers at all of those grades and levels, and also incorporate some of the aspects that the founders wanted to see improved, like sports and those types of things. So that was really our kind of first initial grant, and from there we decided to launch a scholarship program that would really benefit the students and the seniors of that high school. We wanted to create a pathway for them to succeed and find opportunities to develop their skills or continue their education. And being in a small community, some did that, but others would stay and do farming and other things. So we wanted to give all the students a opportunity to kind of dream big, to look for opportunities to attend a college or university wherever they wanted to in the country. And so whether that was staying in Idaho or going outside of Idaho. So we worked with a team at Foundation Source to develop a pretty unique scholarship program that really incentivized students to pursue technical vocational type certificates or degrees, or those that already had college credit from their high school days, and sort of this dual credit program to be able to incentivize them to complete their degrees faster. And so that was really, kind of the initial focus and problems were kind of there in the local community. We also, one of the early grants was also establishing a camp that would lift and empower youth ages 12 to 18 to help them develop life skills. And that was really a grant that would focus on not only just their local community, but other communities, surrounding communities and counties in that area. So those were some of our initial grants that we did.
Thank you. How about you, Lori?
Sure. The family that started the Justamere Foundation, again, they did very well for themselves in Chester County. And Chester County itself is a fairly affluent area in Pennsylvania. So the disparity in some of the neighborhoods that have, don't have the same opportunities and they don't have the same education options, the education that they need for careers that will pull them out of poverty. They just weren't seeing that. There were a lot of jobs, particularly in the trades or in some medical areas and in IT. And those jobs generally didn't necessarily require four-year degrees, but the options, the grant opportunities, the scholarship opportunities for kids looking to go into those areas just wasn't there. There's plenty of loans and scholarships for four-year colleges, but that doesn't necessarily get them what they need as quickly as they need it. So I was charged with looking into what are the obstacles, what are the gaps in programs, what are the things that are keeping these students from seeing what their employment potential was. So that's how we started. We wanted to look at specifically scholarships that were non-traditional, particularly in the trades. And what we found is that the scholarship for the trade classes themselves wasn't necessarily what they needed or the only thing that they needed, that there were a lot of other things that were the obstacles or the hurdles that were keeping them from their success. So we started looking into what those programs are. We saw that transportation was a huge issue. If you got the trade, you got the information, you got the knowledge, but you couldn't get to the job, it was all for naught. So we started looking into that as an obstacle for employment. We started looking into some programs for childcare that helped, affordable childcare, which is a huge personal issue for me. I feel very strongly about that. But if you can't have a place where your child is safe while you're working, then again, that might as well be a 20-foot high wall as a hurdle. So those were the things that we started investigating early. And again, we found that maybe our rails needed to be widened a little bit as far as what our targets were for this. But still, we have been able to secure scholarships for over 800 students to complete a trade training program. So hopefully that will be instrumental for their lives to get them to a salary, a self-sustaining salary, or hopefully a family-sustaining salary ultimately. And the family, as I'm doing this research and I'm looking to them, for, am I driving in the right direction? They've been very open to hearing what the actual problems are. I found, coming from a business background, people come into a situation thinking they understand what the problem is and what the solution is, so they work back from there. I was fortunate to have an open mind in the board and in the founding family, that they wanted to hear what are the actual issues that are keeping kids from these salaries. And so that's how we've kind of molded, instead of just, staying strict to our rails, we have been able to pivot and adjust and hopefully make a bigger impact as we take those things into consideration. Again, scholarships is still our number one target. And usually scholarships in areas that don't normally have scholarships, like trades or some of the others that I mentioned. But again, the ability to have some flexibility has been, I think, pivotal to our impact in this area.
Thanks so much, Lori and Steve. So let's look at a few of our starting point takeaways here. Funders, they clearly had firsthand experience with the problems they wanted to address. They rolled up their sleeves, they jumped in with potential solutions, not necessarily knowing if they would be the answer, but exploring to what extent they could help. The goal was to learn throughout the grant-making process about the extent of the problem and the steps to respond. And they knew that there would be an opportunity to adapt their grant making. Let's hear a little bit more about how these experiences shaped the foundation's next steps. So Lori and Steve, a few more questions. What did you learn from your initial foray in grant making? Were there things you knew you didn't want to repeat? And likewise, were there things that were successful or themes that you knew you wanted to continue to incorporate into your grant making? Lori, let's start with you.
Okay. I mentioned before that it turned out there were a lot of barriers that were keeping kids from getting to a career trade in wherever area that they were going into. So looking at what those foundational problems were that were impacting their ability to do that. Sometimes it was English as a second language. They needed some training in that. General financial literacy was important. How to apply for a job, all those soft skills, how to make sure that you show up. What do you do if you're sick? What things that you don't normally think about or you assume people know going into a job. Those were areas that we thought maybe needed a little additional help. And they were, many of the organizations that we reached out to, they were running on, a shoestring. So those were small areas that we could, assist with that made a big impact, and hopefully, will drive a bigger influence in this whole area that we're looking to impact. I think there was particularly in this area, many of the students coming in are first-year students. So there was a lot of they don't know what they don't know. So we also looked for programs that coach them on how to, fill out college applications, what their options even were. We were working with after-school programs that helped mentor kids through that process that might not have had an adult that could help answer those questions. So, again, keeping an open mind as to what our targets were, we were able to build a bigger picture of what our impact was going to be.
Great, thank you. Steve, could you tell us a bit about lessons learned?
Yeah, absolutely, Robin. I think from a kind of just a overarching general theme, one thing we discovered in those early experiences in grant making is that your grant making can really impact two areas. It can impact systems or individuals or both. And when you can really make grants that achieve that, where they're impacting systems and individuals simultaneously, I think you have achieved greater impact. And they're also mutually reinforcing. So I think we saw that with the school district grant first sort of improved learning outcomes at the high school level, and then that sort of led into kind of feeding more qualified applicants for the scholarship program. And so kind of saw some of that kind of mutually reinforcing part of things. That some of our initial grants, kind of looking back early on, were not maybe as aligned. They were aligned with our mission, but they weren't quite maybe aligned along those impact dimensions. And so, that was one kind of learning thing is how to make our grant making a little more intentional along those dimensions of helping systems and individuals. And that's really where, that's part of the mission statement of Åcahand, is to lift the one and amplify impact. So it kind of incorporates those two areas. I think those kind of early grants help solidify kind of our focus on education and learning as one of the main areas of focus for the foundation. And one of the takeaways from kind of those early grant experiences and going through that processes was also, not only kind of listening and evaluating what your charity partners or the grantees' needs are, their areas of need, but also realizing that you can really have a lot of input into the design and development of the grants and the grant making process that impacts, that aligns with your programs and mission. So that was kind of one key takeaway. So from those early experiences, kind of with the scholarship program, we took that and, as we learned more about the college and vocational aspects of those scholarship programs, kind of jumped into a bigger arena and tackled a couple of new scholarship programs with a couple of universities that were focused on first generation students and international students. And that was kind of really rewarding, and again was able to come back and look at how do we design those and have a lot of input into those types of things. And we found that organizations are very open to kind of working with you and developing those programs. We also, I guess from some of our learning experiences also informed how we then started to build out additional partnerships and with both other charity partners and colleges, universities, to do things like support and enhance entrepreneurship at high school and college level in Idaho. And we also supported some things around, partly during the pandemic, but around coding for high school students kind of during the summer. So kind of started to develop some of those partnerships after those initial grant making decisions was helpful as we progressed through.
That's terrific. And so, applying lessons learned, a few takeaways I think are stay true to your core driver, whether it is a geographical area or a particular community, or the programmatic theme of creating pathways of opportunity to succeed, work, and earn a livable wage. Be steadfast around those things and continue to stay open to learning. This has been a theme and a basis for success for both of these foundations. And then taking this one step further, they are deeply committed to constant improvement and not afraid to expand or change tack when it makes sense. Experiment, learn, adjust. And both are talking about getting to systems change, which is a topic for another webinar entirely, but that is emerging as another part of the thought process and tying grants together. Both of these foundations are excellent examples of continual learning and growth. So next, we want to hear Lori and Steve talk about how they continue to evolve even beyond the early stages. You might call this the 3.0 version of each of their foundations. So advancing your grant making. You want to expand your reach and venture into new territory. How did you do that? What are some possible new grant making tools you may have used? And after a couple of rounds of grants, what's changed? What new approaches or tools have you deployed? And have you tried new program areas that may have been unexpected? Let's start with you, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. We've kind of expanded things in different ways. We expanded into giving into other parts of the country, and in a new community, Florida, where the founders had relocated to. And we recognized that the Åcahand team had the skills and capabilities that could help other nonprofits in that area. So during the pandemic, we started with doing a clothing drive that was to benefit a couple of nonprofit organizations, and then we said, oh, this is great, let's add some staff. So we added a couple of staff members in that location to really start developing relationships with community partners in the area. And we found that was really helpful to have people on the ground and in a particular location to work with them. So with employees sort of identifying and building relationships with community partners, we expanded into more frequent direct charitable type activities. So, we began to run different events where the proceeds would benefit different charity partners. All the proceeds would go towards them, and expanded sort of our giving toolbox, I guess, in that sense, and deploying some of our logistics know-how to doing some larger events. So those included things like food drives, the clothing drive, expanded larger clothing drive this year, and then also our annual Light Orlando Christmas concerts, which kind of benefit community partners. So we now work with about 18 to 20 different nonprofit partners in Central Florida, and these nonprofits tackle a number of different educational and social issues, from food insecurity to domestic abuse, homelessness, sex trafficking, and healthcare for underserved populations. And so, I think, as we kind of look at the progression of types of things the foundation's done, we didn't start out thinking, oh, we're going to work with all these different charity partners, but we found that those relationships are really proven to be really valuable in terms of kind of building community and have some great partnerships that we're working with now.
Lori?
We found that as we were diving deeper and deeper into what some of the core issues were, we were finding more that literacy, particularly childhood literacy, was something that had a big influence on the trajectory of some of these kids. And so we decided to kind of hit that hard. We hired a program officer that would be dedicated to looking into that as an issue. And we found that by looking to childhood and literacy 0 to 5, that actually expanded the literacy of the parents and of the older kids in the family. So we're hoping to start an influence trend there that will hopefully lead those kids, not just those kids, but their older siblings in a better direction. We also found that by looking at different areas and looking at different partners, that we were starting to get to a volume that required some technology in order to manage. And I come from tech. I'm very used to using tech for sales support and keeping track of things. And I found that using Foundation Source's tools that way, it did make it very easy for us to track the applications for grants, what the statuses of those were. It made the reporting very easy, and it also is making the follow-up on those grants very, very informational, I guess is the word. You can throw money out to the universe all you want, but until you know that you're doing it, with meaning, it doesn't matter. And I found that the tools that were available to us through Foundation Source were very helpful there.
Thanks so much to you both. For both these foundations, they have clearly advanced their grant making over time. And I'd like to bring in a few takeaways from this part. Having expanded their networks, meeting more experts and service providers in the field, these foundations are venturing further into new territories, whether it's engaging with the community beyond grant making or going deep into a new topic. And what holds their focus is the discovery of what works and adapting the foundation's tools, methods, and infrastructure to get there. So Lori and Steve, with all that has been accomplished in a relatively short while, what do each of you see on the horizon for your foundation? You have done so much in a short amount of time. What's next? Stay the course, or do you anticipate other changes? Also, talk to us about what you have integrated into your approach to grant making that you may not have utilized before. Lori, we'll start with you.
Sure. I had a boss one time that said, sometimes the best idea comes from someone other than me, which I thought was kind of profound. The thing is, the people that are out there, boots on the ground, know the needs and know this industry way more than I do. And, you know, I consider my ignorance here to be my best asset, because I freely ask them, what are the problems? What are the needs? What do you see as the solutions for those? And that open communication with our partners has led us in areas that we had not really understood was an issue, or an influence on the issues that we were trying to work on. But it also just, educated me in what the gaps are in the programs. There's tons of state and federal programs out there. But then you find that this one little area is keeping so many people back, and there's nobody looking at that from a financial funding standpoint. So by jumping in and, kind of chewing on that problem, we're getting people to the other side of that, into areas that they, that we had not thought of before, or making grants to organizations that would have never been on our initial list.
Yeah, and for us, we I think we're always trying to bring some level of innovation into our philanthropy. From a domestic side, we're focused on continuing trying to find ways to expand opportunities for nonprofit partners and connect them in the community. I think that's one area of approach to our grant making, kind of building those strong relationships and trying to link them really to additional resources. So finding ways that we can link them together. But we're also, I guess in terms of new things that we're looking at, we're looking at implementing an international scholarship program that is new for us, that will focus on skills-based technical and vocational training and college level diplomas in the South Pacific. And so that's kind of exciting thing, a little bit out of our, in terms of new horizons. We've also been kind of, in terms of, you asked about integrating our approach to grant making. One area is kind of looking at the complexities of international grant making. And so we've working in globally in a country of Papua New Guinea to try and see how it can impact education there and this is a country was kind of severely hobbled by the pandemic, and there's not a lot of government infrastructure around early childhood education and high school, college level education. So trying to ask, questions around how do we increase educational opportunities for the early childhood level. That approach, Lori, you mentioned kind of networking, trying to figure out the best partners to work with in those situations has been something that's been kind of an expansion of our grant making a little bit, and also how do we impact things like the digital divide in places like that with access to technology in the learning environment, and how do we tackle some of those things like you mentioned earlier, Lori, like transportation, if they can't get to a job or can't do something, how do you address that in a country like that really has no transportation and infrastructure? So those are the kind of things, apprenticeships, things like that students can do. How do we kind of interface with employers and others? So those are some aspects of, I guess, new parts of our grant making, but really comes down to how do we ask those questions, diving a little deeper and trying to solve problems.
Thank you both. We want to sort of pause for a moment and talk about some of the big picture takeaways. This conversation has taken us in some important and interesting directions. A few things. Any starting point can be daunting, and Steve and Lori have shown us that you don't have to have all of the answers at the beginning. You don't have to be an expert. Perhaps more important than knowing everything about the issue you want to support is knowing who to ask what questions. Partnering with community leaders, field experts, and those with boots on the ground will guide those early steps. Philanthropy is a pursuit where taking risks makes sense. You can build the plane while flying it. And sometimes it's going to feel that way. And then learning while giving and being open to new information that could change the course of the foundation's direction, and being flexible enough to adapt or pivot towards new methods, tools, and topics means that you are building expertise while developing meaningful and potentially lasting relationships with the community. In short, act, learn, and adapt. A couple of themes that emerged throughout this conversation is the incredible importance of partnerships. And you don't have a community, perhaps a network to begin with, but it's clear that both Lori and Steve have developed them over time. And one of the things that I think is striking is that there's a lot of conversation in the sector in 2022 about trust-based philanthropy. And I just want to point out that we have two grant makers here today that have been living and breathing trust in their interactions with their nonprofit partners, their communities, their experts in the field, their founders. They are the personification of that, even without using the term. And another, I think, really important theme is that as they layered on experience and utilized different tools, one of the things that they're both aspiring to do is change the lives of individuals and start to affect systems, those systems that are creating barriers for the members of those communities. And that too is something that comes with time. It's not going to be your first foray. It's not going to be your first grant where you're going to happen upon an incredibly powerful systems change. But I think you will all find those levers as you continue to delve further. So this concludes the formal part of our presentation, and we're now eager to turn to questions and answers. Members of the audience, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them. And if we can't for some reason, we'll try to follow up with you directly afterwards. So I'm just going to try to pull some questions. Okay, very practical question around how do you do this? So Steve and Lori, do you have a grant schedule for submission? Or do you ever use requests for proposals? And can you mention a little bit about what if you do use an application, can you talk a little bit about what types of information you might require in those applications, and possibly other supporting documents, that sort of thing?
Okay. Do you want me to take this one?
Sure.
We early on, I'm kind of the school, do it on paper first, figure out what works and doesn't work, and then then create the system. That's a programming thing. Figure out the system that does what you want it to do, but to do that you have to know what you want it to do first. So in talking with our benefactors, we decided that there were 5 things that we really wanted to know from the organizations that we were working with. 1, what is the problem? 2, what do you think the solution is? 3, how would you implement that, and what do you need to do that? I guess that's 3 and 4. how would you do that, and what would you need in order to do that? And then fifth, what does success look like? How will you know if you've done it appropriately? So we started out with those 5 questions as kind of our framework for the grant request module. And I figured 1 or 2 sentences in either of those any of those categories tells me a couple of things. Number one, that you understand it enough to articulate it succinctly, and 2, that you know what the program solutions are. And usually the people with the boots on the ground, they know what the issues are. They know what they need to do it. You just got to kind of open the gate for them to express that. So we took those questions and we put those into, with the help of Foundation Source, into an official grant request system. So putting that on paper, and they were, real mean. They made me put a whole bunch of admin stuff around that. But my core 5 things are still what I base my grant making on. Now, generally, before I have a request for a grant, I've already talked with the people. I've already understood what their issues are. And the grant request is really kind of the final step, where I tell them, okay, you can articulate this as the problem. We see, what do you kind of think that's is the answer? And okay, we will have worked out that vetting ahead of time as to whether it's something that falls within our rails. And if it is, then I recommend, that they put in the official grant, put it on paper, give us all the backup paperwork for it that, is required by Foundation Source. And then, then we're not turning down a whole lot of grants because I've already communicated what we want to see in the grant and in what form. So that's the process that we have run with. We don't have a grant cycle. We basically are running right now because of our youth. We're only a year and a half old. We're trying to hit whatever nails are, popping out at the time. So we're whack-a-moling, right now. And as as we build our relationships, we are having a better communication with the organizations that we're working with. So hopefully, as time goes on, we will have, an easier process with them that, will facilitate bigger and, more impactful programs. Does that answer the question?
Steve, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I would just add, in terms of like you asked about supporting documentation or, obviously things like, the Form 990, those types of things, but also we also asked kind of the question around who are their other large donors, because that's not always apparent sometimes in the financial paperwork. So asking about other large donors, what they've done, it's kind of sort of guide how we look at those applications. But we're similar to you, Lori. We do more of a request for proposal, or we don't have a formal grant cycle, so it's more looking at things on a case-by-case basis that align with the mission of the foundation.
Here's one about working with your founders. As you research your foundation's program areas, how do you incorporate the founders into the learning and decision-making process? Lori, you want to start? And
Sure. When I do my homework, I take all that information that I've discovered about the organization, what their mission is, what their plans are for resolving whatever issue is that we're discussing for the grant. And I take that in and I condense it into basically a paragraph. Like, here's why I think this is a good idea for you to spend your money here. That, with my experience and knowing the directions that they are okay with me going in, that usually is sufficient for us to for them to make the decision. I put that information in, a few places, so it's always available if we want to go back, if we want to look at, okay, why did we do any work with these people in the first place? Because some of the organizations that we're working with, by their name, you would have no idea that they would fall into our into our rails. So it's a good way to kind of keep a reminder of what we're doing with them and why we're doing it. But it also gives my approvers, which is basically the board, a quick way of either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Now, that said, occasionally they come back and I have not provided enough information, or I didn't make a good enough case. And fortunately, we have an open enough relationship that they can just, shoot me an email, give me more information on this, and I'll give them a reason why. An example was we had it was basically an arts dance academy that had would consider it way out of our range, but we provided them some computers and some a few other things for the studio. And what came back was, how is this for trade, and for how is this within our rails. And what happened was, when COVID hit, this studio happened to be in an area that was financially depressed. Nobody had a computer at home. Nobody had internet. Most of them didn't have internet. Many of them barely had cell phones. So what they did there was they turned their studio into a kind of a learning center where kids could go during the day. They could get there. They had computers there for them to use for their virtual classrooms, and for the for studying after after hours and doing homework. But they also had parental coaches there that are not parental, but mentors to help kids navigate. And it was almost, a benefit to the working parents who had no other way of, putting their kids through those years without, having, you can't leave a 10-year-old home alone and just expect them to have the maturity to go to school all day. So it was good for the parents. They were able to have a job while the pandemic was going on. So they had those jobs that were required during the pandemic. But it also, served the students. So even though, on the surface, it didn't look like it had anything to do with us, they used a lot of their annual budget for that project. So then coming into the new year, this was kind of backfilling some of that budget for them, so that they could then continue on with programs like that, or after school programs that were helpful. That's kind of a roundabout answer, but having the openness to just discuss things that are, I would say off brand, openly and reasonably with the board and the people who are actually putting the check on the grant. It's just a relationship that you just absolutely have to have.
What about you, Steve?
I would, echo some of the same things Lori mentioned, but in terms of, in addition to sort of formal board meetings, in terms of working with founders, a lot of it's kind of putting together, myself or the team putting together kind of a summary of what we've explored, the pros and cons, if you will, and then providing kind of a recommendation, so kind of a summary email or document to them. And Gloria said usually that's kind of enough to give them a decision, or to make a decision. If not, providing more details. So they like sort of the high level information first, and additional details. One of the founders likes more details, so we'll provide that kind of in a separate document sometimes for that individual to kind of dig a little deeper. But really the, and formal board discussions around strategy for the year, or different types of areas that we want to focus on or establish. I think another thing with our founders is, particularly on the international side, is having them involved, taking them to kind of see things, and not just for the sake of a trip, but really to kind of see on the ground, is this really where the foundation wants to commit resources, and significant resources sometimes to an issue, or to or another party. So kind of that on the ground kind of learning with them is also critical.
Yeah, and I hear you are also adapting the information you provide to the appetite for information,
Yes.
of each of your board members. Steve, we've got an interesting question about the nonprofit partners that you work with. How large and established are they? And has the size of the grantee partners shifted over time as the foundation has evolved?
I would say, the grantee partners kind of range all different sizes. and different lengths of time that they've been established in kind of Central Florida. Some of them have been around for, several decades. Others are kind of new partners, maybe in the last couple of years, where they established a focus. One in particular, focused on homelessness and food self-sufficiency for women and single mothers. So, that's a little new organization. So really, it's a wide variety of community partners. And I would say that it's really more kind of the level of grants maybe that have occurred. So, some might be smaller institutions that have larger grants given where we see can have an impact, and others maybe just continually have more of a smaller grant size, but on a regular basis. So, like multiple year type grants.
Great. Robin, a question for you. What if we are having trouble narrowing down to one topic or location? How does a board with limited research bandwidth proceed?
We hear this one a lot, and the answer is take the plunge. The best way to learn about an issue is to participate in finding solutions. So the main way for a funder to do this is by making a grant and partnering with an implementing organization. In the startup phase, or when a foundation's making a transition, it's important to get involved in new sectors. In addition to learning through direct experience, it's also a way to demonstrate to grantee partners and peer funders that your foundation's taking a real interest in an issue. Participation can open doors to peer discussions, information sharing, and more learning. So note that taking this plunge doesn't mean that you're committed forever. You're allowed to experiment and change direction as you learn.
Another question is around sort of length of funding. Hold on, I'm looking for it. Sorry, I lost that question. I'm going to move on to impact, and I think this is one for both Lori and Steve. How are you defining impact, and what are you measuring? What are you looking for as you're trying to move the needle on the problems that you're each trying to solve? And I wonder if we'll start with you, Lori.
Sure. We're, like I said, we're about a year and a half old. So many of the scholarship grants that we have started have been within the last year. So those kids are either just coming out of those programs, or they're, still in them. So the impact that we're getting, we have built the relationships with the organization so that we get a lot of that anecdotal feedback as to, I've got a whole drawer full of thank you letters from the kids that did not see a future for themselves that now can, because of the the donations that we made to their education. I'll make you cry. I mean, there's a lot there that you can see, like you said, hundreds of kids that would not have gone in a positive direction if it hadn't been for the grants that we made. So unfortunately, yeah, the tools for tracking are going to be very limited. Did they graduate? Did how what the dropout rates are? And the schools usually have those already, so it's not anything additional that I'm asking them to do. But that's really the only tangible way I have a tracking success. I'm hoping as we go farther, we're not allowed to track individual students, but I'll be able to look at the needle for our area in general and see, what are the employment rates? What are the, are we making a bigger impact, on the graduation rates? Are we, the literacy rates, on the, on the community in general? So, again, success is going to be seen 10 years from now on some of the programs that we're doing, but we'll use the immediate numbers when we have them.
What about you, Steve?
Yeah, that's always the most challenging question is how do you measure impact? I think from the scholarship side of things, like you mentioned, Lori, we see how quickly they graduate. Our scholarship program, particularly with a couple of them are renewable, so seeing kind of the renewable rates or who comes back and who kind of drops out is kind of one measure of success. And generally, they do want to renew and finish their degree. And then just I mentioned sort of the dual credit program. So if someone already has their associates leaving high school, do they? We've had a couple where they actually did finish in 2 years, and that was great that we were able to scholarship them for just those 2 years. I think for larger grants, oftentimes will require kind of formal reporting. So like an annual report that provides a view of impact and the different, if we laid out goals and objectives, for a grant, kind of what the responses are to that. And that helps tailor then if you're considering sort of a multi-year grant with that institution, how you approach that. Are there areas that need to be trimmed? Are there, we're kind of big believers in, teaching someone how to fish, really, right? Like not keeping them there as permanent grantees at the same levels, but hopefully they're finding other ways to make their institutions more sustainable. So how do we, so getting kind of formal reporting back from those institutions is helpful in engaging impact.
Here's another question. Your experiences make so much sense and seem very intentional. What if our foundation doesn't have a clearly mapped out plan like yours? Steve, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, we really didn't, I guess we didn't know what we didn't know from the, there was, it may seem intentional, and there's certain aspects that, looking back were intentional, but they were, I guess, let you, it was really, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, kind of act, learn, adapt, right? So that was some of that aspect to the foundation. Starting out, it was kind of a learning process. Team at Foundation Source was invaluable in helping us learn different tools that we could use in grant making, but also how to avoid issues, I guess, and things that we were doing. So, that was, really, I guess, for us, the aspect of trying to create opportunity wherever we're involved is, and kind of amplify change was really what was driving things. And so, certain interactions with partners led to other grants or partnerships. Interactions with faith-based partner led to exploring things in Papua New Guinea and the South Pacific. And so those types of things just evolved over time and kind of informed our grant making.
Great. Lori, a quick one on that?
I was going to say, we decided very early to, we made a conscious decision to write our goals and on paper instead of etching it in stone. So we had a lot of pads of paper to figure this out. But if you are not flexible and you're not, not able to see that maybe I don't have the best answer for this problem, maybe somebody else does, then you got to keep the impact in mind and not what I think the problem or the solution is to the problem.
That's great. And in our final minute or so, 30 seconds each, maybe, what was the most surprising thing you learned along the way? And how did it change your approach? Lori and then Steve.
By far, the passion of the people that are out there, boots on the ground, doing the work, just surprised the hell out of me. They are working so hard to make the world a better place. And the best thing that I can do for them is give them the resources to do that.
Fantastic. Steve?
Yeah, I think for Åcahand and Foundation, for me, it was really the most surprising thing was just the number of tools and ways that you can pursue and look at your grant making. We haven't done any program related investments yet or those types of things, but there's so many different ways that the foundation can get involved, whether it's through direct charitable activities, through individual grants, emergency or hardship grants. There's just a ton of different ways that the foundation can can do their grant making. So I think that was kind of the biggest surprise for me.
Fantastic. We're at the hour. It's been a wonderful conversation. Lori and Steve, we cannot thank you enough. And on behalf of Robin and myself at Foundation Source, thank you to the audience for joining us today. If your question wasn't answered during our Q&A, we will do our best to follow up with you offline. And we're just delighted that you could all join us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Been privileged. Thank you.